Welcome to Art Salon. I'm Ellie Shore, and I've been producing these salons for almost 3 years now. It's my pleasure to have a different artist speaking at each salon and to have a growing discussion and awareness of all of the different ways that contemporary artists are working today. Tonight, our speaker is Clarence Skip Measelle, who has been teaching here at the Armory since the Armory began, and has also been teaching in the public schools and then at Palm Beach State College in Lake Worth for many years. He's a professional painter who has been exhibiting his work all over the United States. He had his first show at the Norton Museum in 1975. Skip's work started as photorealism and has gradually evolved over the years to what he calls abstract illusionism. What we're going to do tonight is he's first going to tell us about his early life and his development in his earlier career, and then we're going to go out to the gallery because so much of his work is hanging right here, right now. Okay? Skip Measelle.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to be here. As Ellie said, I've been here since the beginning. I was here with the first faculty. And at that time, we had a presentation where Bob Montgomery was giving $100,000 to refurbish the Armory. At the time, it was almost ready to, I think, be condemned. It was in such bad shape. I went to Lake Worth High School. When I was in high school, we used to come here for dances on Saturday night. There was no air conditioning, and it was really run down, but it was still a great spot. The Montgomery Hall was where the stage was at the one end. And I'm telling you, there were probably 150, 200 kids here every Saturday night. Mostly local bands, nobody really special, but it was very new. This was in the 60s. This was like 1964, 65 when I was coming. So what I'm going to do tonight, I'm going to talk to you about my early start with painting and how I got to pretty much this period right now, to what I'm doing now. It's a bit biographical. It's not going to be political. It's not going to be conceptual. It's not going to be anything too highfalutin. But you'll get to know me a little bit. And one of the reasons that I've had this show was hoping that maybe I would get some interest in my classes. I teach a mixed media acrylic painting class here. So far, I've been getting pretty good enrollment, but we can always, use a few more students. So if you know anyone that's interested, and after you see this, maybe you could tell them, to come see us. I was born in Daytona, but I lived in Flagler Beach 67 years ago. There was nothing there on the beach. I've seen pictures of this where you could look north and south and see nothing. There are no condominiums, there are no houses, but there was a gift shop. And behind the gift shop, my parents rented this trailer. And the lady that owned the gift shop took the wheels off the trailer because she was afraid my father might steal it. This was just over the dune. My mother owned one pair of shoes. This was just after World War II. And my dad would get carpentry jobs and things like that, but he would also find roadkill and things that he would do some taxidermy on. And he made cypress knee lamps. That's the beginning of a cypress knee lamp in the middle there. It's just the cypress knee itself. But he would go into the swamps and he would cut the knees and then he would make these lamps. And then each week he would drive into Daytona with me and my mom. My dad would sell the cypress knee lamps and the roadkill stuff in the bars to the drunks. And they would make enough money to buy groceries, take in a movie, fill the car with gas, and go back and do it again next week. And so they did this for, I think, about a year. Of course, I don't remember any of it, but they have some great pictures of it. Okay, I was a teacher at Lake Worth Junior High. When I graduated from college, I started in the Glades teaching. I got a degree in fine art. I have a bachelor's of fine arts and a master's in art education. But there weren't any jobs when I graduated, so I was substituting first, and then the first job that came up was in the Glades. And here I'm graduating from college thinking I want to be this artist, and they tell me I have to teach elementary school. I've never taught elementary school. I interned in a high school, and so I have to learn how to teach elementary kids, and which was, if it wasn't for the other two teachers, I don't think I could have done it at all. But they were really good at it. They taught me how to teach. We saw the kids in all 10 elementary schools in the Glades from Canal Point to South Bay. I would see the kids once a month for an hour. Then we would give lesson plans to the teachers. I did that as long as I could, but I had a bad back. I was in a car accident after I graduated from college, and I had a hairline crack in my back. And it was just killing me because back then, the routes across the road out there would make the highway, like this. So the whole way out, it was like that. So I got a transfer into North Shore High School, which is now Bach School of the Arts. From there, I went to Lakewood Junior High, and I spent the next 8.5 years teaching at Lakewood Junior High and painting every night. My first real break came, I was teaching at the Norton Inn. There wasn't an armory school back then. This was in 1972. And I was teaching a young adult drawing class. And I met the new director, Dick Madigan, and we became friends, and we started to socialize a bit. And he introduced me to the Sturrocks owned Boynton Landscaping in Palm Beach. We went to dinner with them, and one night at dinner, Mrs. Sturrock said, I've been taking courses at the Norton, for 15 years, and no one's even taught me how to paint an apple. And so I was thinking about that, and I was working on a red Ferrari, painting a red Ferrari at the time. And I had all this red paint, and I thought, maybe I'll paint her an apple, because we were going to dinner at their house the next week. And so as a gift, I thought I would bring the apple. And so this is one of those apples. But while I was painting it, I thought, I wonder what it would look like to do 50 apples. Maybe 2 rows of 25. And all the same background, all the same size apple, but change the apple just slightly. Anyway, going back to giving them the apple, Jimmy Sturrock, her husband, said he really wasn't happy about this because it cost him $1,400 to redo the kitchen so that the apple looked right, in the kitchen. But so what I did was I bought all these canvases, and I made 50 apples, and each one is just slightly different. Oh, by the way, I told Dick Madigan, I said, what do you think this would look like if I did 50 of these? We put them on the wall. And he said, you do them, I'll hang them. And that was like, what? This is the Norton, and I'm in my 20s, and I'm going to get to have a show at the Norton. And he said, yeah, and you can have some of your photorealist work too. So, wow, this is such a break. And so anyway, that's how this is it's kind of like an accident that the whole thing happened. When you walked in and looked at these from the other side of the room, they had kind of an op feeling in that they vibrated just a little bit because the colors changed, but they also had that pop art connotation because the apple means something to just about everyone, at least in the Western world. I mean, there's some association with apples. You've got Adam and Eve in the apple. You've got William Tell in the apple, the Big Apple in New York. And so there were a lot of people that would associate with this. I'm skipping around just a little bit here. This was kind of the work I was doing then. I was working a lot with automobiles and airplanes and big green waxy leaves. This is all airbrush. And what I'm going to show you next is some of the process, how this comes about. This was one of my earliest car paintings. When you're doing airbrush work, you have to tape off everything so you don't overspray onto the area that you don't want to get paint on. But then you have to come back and tape over that to do whatever's next to it. And so I'm showing you a very short series. There's a lot more that goes on that's involved with this. This was my studio. This was 30 years ago. I've been in my present studio now 28 years. This is about 30, maybe 31 or 2 years ago. And it's not quite finished. When I moved into my new studio, I took that same kind of brown paper and put it all across the walls and on the floor because I had a month-to-month lease. I didn't know how long I would be there. I've been there 28 years. I could have owned the place twice for the rent that I paid there. So anyway, this is the way it looked when it was finished. At the Norton, these were some of the paintings that I had in that show. This 5 and 10 cent store used to be in Lake Worth. It's something else now. But it was a magic place for me when I was a little kid. I grew up here. I've been here since 1956. And I thought I had this mystical, magical quality that I could find my way to the toy section without making any wrong turns. I thought I could walk in and I would be able to go straight to, and I always did. Then I realized later that in 5 and dime stores, they usually put the toys right in the middle somewhere. But they also had a fluoroscope. I'll never forget in this place, where you put your feet in, And I think it's X-rays. They were shooting through your feet. I'm surprised my feet are still here, because you can see your bones and stuff through your shoes and everything. They outlawed that pretty quick after that. But anyway, that's the 5 and dime store. That was one of my first storefronts that I painted. Every painting that you'll see tonight, there was probably anywhere from 5 to 20 or more paintings in that series. This airplane over here, the one on the right is the same plane on the right in the painting. And I've probably painted that 5 or 6 times. One of them is in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum now. This was the first painting that I really took a lot of time on. And after I finished this, I felt like maybe I'm onto something. Maybe I can do this. But it took me about 6 weeks, to do it, because there's a lot of taping off to do, a lot of studying. And this was from my photograph. But that plane over there, that's a custom Cessna. The people that own Lang's Liquors in Lake Worth used to own that plane. I didn't find out until years later when their son was in my class at Lake Worth Junior High. This is the same plane. This is the one that's in the Smithsonian now. It's 60 inches by 80 inches. The slide is a little cropped at the top. It actually goes up a little more than that. This is Bud Molt's plane. Bud Molt started Bud's Chicken in Lake Worth. When I was in high school, you could get a chicken dinner for $1 there. And it was all cash. And Bud made a lot of money. His wife got this for him for his birthday. And he liked it so much that he ended up buying another 6 paintings from me over the years. These are all photorealist airbrush paintings. There's hardly any, if any, brushwork at all on these. The airbrush, if you don't know what it is, it's an instrument that it's like a pen, size of a pen. You can spray dots of paint. It's very tedious. You have to clean the brush all the time. You have to filter the paint through a sieve so that you don't get any lumps in the airbrush, because that'll clog it up. There's a lot of changing of the colors and coming back. So when I had that show at the Norton, I told you I had this young adult class, and I had a student in there. I think she was in about the 9th grade, 9th or 10th grade. And she said, "Oh, my mother saw your work." And she's the assistant director at Palm Beach Galleries on Worth Avenue. And she said she loved your work, and she wants you to show your work there. And I said, "Great, that's, thank you." I said, "Well, should I call her?" And she said, "No, just go over. Just go over and tell her," like that. So I go over with my slides, and I walk in the door, and I said, "Hi, I'm Skip Measelle." And she just stared at me. I said, "Your daughter said that you really liked my work. You saw my one-man show at the Norton." And she said, "I don't know who you are. I've never heard of you before." I thought, "Oh, great." And so she says, "But I'll look at your work." And so I had slides. I had a slide portfolio. And I had the apples in there. And she says, "Well, Christmas is coming up." She says, "Maybe we could do a Christmas tree with your apples. We'll make the shape of a Christmas tree at one end of the gallery, and we'll take a couple of your paintings." So that's how that worked out. And so in the next 3 years, they sold like 40 paintings, including all those apples. And the title of this painting, I titled it "Easy Rider" because of the hood ornament. This painting was at the Norton in a group show. And the title of it was "My Love is Bigger Than a Cadillac." I've got all these little stories. I hope these aren't going to bore you, because I won't tell you a story about every painting. But this one, I think, is a pretty good story. The lady that bought this, she bought it, and I was introduced to her. And she says, "Do you want to know why I'm buying this painting?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And she said, "Well," she says, "25 years ago, my husband's parents told him that if he married me, they would buy him this Cadillac." And she says, "It's the exact same Cadillac. It's the same color, it's everything." And she was going to give it to him for their anniversary present. And so that's just, and "My Love is Bigger Than a Cadillac" was the title of the painting. So it was just serendipitous. This is how scary I looked back then. I used to wear that tennis hat everywhere. I was on a softball team. I didn't wear a baseball cap. I wore that tennis cap. It's kind of embarrassing now. I'm looking back at that. This is another example of how much taping off you have to do. I would use saran wrap in the shiny places on the canvas because I wanted to see through what I'd already painted. Joel Cohen, do any of you know him? He's a photographer. He's local. He and his wife bought that. I think it was at an auction that was here to raise money for the armory. This is what it looks like finished. So I probably painted 15 or 20 motorcycles as well. This one's in Chicago somewhere. This is a Bentley, and This was sold in Palm Beach at the Palm Beach Galleries. And the owner of this owns the Hardee's chain of hamburgers. He was an anesthesiologist, and on the side, he started Hardee's. And so they bought a couple other paintings. This one, I don't know who bought it to begin with, but it sold to someone that lived in an apartment on Worth Avenue. And then now there's someone that owns this that bought it at an auction that lives in Kentucky, but he has a gallery in Palm Beach. But he doesn't show this kind of work. But he wants me to do this painting again, but he wants it in red or yellow or something. I don't know. He loves these old Cadillacs. For me, to do these paintings, what I was looking at, I rarely would paint a whole car. I would only paint a section of the car that I thought was the most interesting and maybe the most abstract of the cars. So there's a lot of stuff going on that's sort of distorted in these reflections. And that's what intrigued me. It wasn't actually about the car. I don't know really that much about cars. And I found out that people at these old car meets that I would go to, these antique car shows and things, they weren't interested in art at all. They were nuts and bolts people. They cared about their cars. They could care less about it. Because I thought maybe someone would want a painting of their car. No, they weren't. No one seemed to be interested in that. Bud Mold also owns this. Look how thin I was back then. I must have been 160 pounds back then. But that's me also. I call these self-portrait headlamps because that's me on the left taking the picture. Another one of the plane, same plane. This was at the Lantana Airport, the Florida Aeromotive. This is the art shop in Lake Worth. I did this in the 80s, mid-80s, I don't remember when. That's my Volkswagen in the reflection. What I was trying to do in this particular painting is I was trying to show you two planes, or three planes, excuse me. One plane would be the outside of the art shop, which is where the plants are here on the bottom. Another plane is inside through the window, where you can see the rack of books in the middle and the picture frame. And then the other plane was the reflection of across the street. That's the post office on the right up there. This is all airbrush. These are some more of the cars, some more of the reflective things that I was doing. This was at the Palm Beach Galleries. Those spokes were a nightmare because I had to tape off every spoke and then go back and retape it to tape off the spoke next to it. It took about 60 hours, I think, just to do the spokes on that one. That's a Duesenberg. Because I get restless, I want to try different things. I've done a number of seascapes and underwater, fantasy kind of seascapes. I call this fantasy seascape because the fish are both from the Atlantic and the Pacific. I've probably painted 40 or more mason jars. The first mason jar, I think it's coming up, was at an antique car show in a flea market. And I was taking pictures of everything. And then I liked it so much that I went on to do some more. This is the very first mason jar painting that I did. And I don't know if you noticed, but Ball is the logo there that's on a lot of these. These are old mason jars. Well, I had a show in Key West at a gallery, and I had a painting in there. And I had left the gallery. I had come home, and they called me and said, someone from Denver, from the headquarters of Ball Manufacturing in Denver now, which is an aerospace place now, said they'd like to take a picture of your painting and take it back and show it to their bosses. Their bosses might want one for their office. And so 2 weeks later, I got a letter from their intellectual department that said I had no right to use their logo. And it's the truth. So I'd already painted 40 of them. I didn't tell them that. So that's when I really stopped doing that. I did one more commission, but I didn't use the Ball logo in it. Then I found out later that it really wasn't. I didn't break any laws or anything because I wasn't competing with them. I wasn't making jars, and I wasn't also doing anything that should have been offensive, to them. In fact, I even wrote them back and told them how they could do an advertising campaign like Absolute. I said, why don't you could take these mason jars and you could have a national competition where you would have people paint these jars and put anything in them that they wanted and have, a nationally renowned judge, determine what was good and then write it off. It would be advertising for you. Put it in magazines, and they weren't interested. Senator Bill Bradley bought this in Palm Beach. He had this in his Senate offices in New Jersey. And I think the title was something like Born in the USA or Made in the USA. Made in the USA, I think, is what the title was. That's an old Buick. That was out in John Prince Park here in Lake Worth. These are Chefalera leaves. They call them umbrella leaves. This was just outside my garage door where I lived at the time. And the gray that you see in the background there, that was the top of my air conditioning unit. It just worked out fine there. My insurance man who lives next door to me bought this, and he bought another painting, and I think his wife got this in the divorce. It's a big painting. It was 60 by 80 inches. Eventually, working on my paintings in my studio, the back walls the walls all around my paintings began to fill up with the oversprays and the tape that I would pull off and stick on the wall. And sometimes I would stand back and look at the painting that I was working on. And the walls seemed more interesting to me than the painting. And so I started to inject a little bit of the wall into the painting. And so this tape that you see on here, and there's some overspray and some doodling up here, and that's supposed to be a tack on the top left. That's a clip, a bare clip on top. The bottom, the perforated paper. I started putting the perforated paper in a lot of my paintings back then. But this was the beginning of my work becoming a little more abstract, yet there was still enough realism that most people could tell, what the subject matter was. Then I went further and further. There's a lot that happened in between these, but this is a big painting too. I think this is about 60 by 80 or 60 by 70. But this is using a lot of really thick paint. I went to New York with friends of mine that owned a gallery on Worth Avenue, and we were going to look for a gallery, hoping that we could find artists in a gallery that we could bring to Palm Beach, and then maybe they would take some of our art too. And so the first gallery that we went into was called Jack Gallery in Soho. And I didn't know it at the time, but Jack Gallery was named after Jack Solomon, who was the owner or CEO of Circle Fine Art. And they had 40 galleries around the country. So anyway, they decided they didn't want to give us any of their artists, but they would take a couple of ours. And so I was one of them. And so they took some of my work, and it was more of this abstract work, and they took it and they sold it. And so after about the fourth sale, I said, why don't we have a show sometime? The director, she said, I'll have to talk to some people. And she got back to me and she says, okay, there's a slot in February we can put you in. So I had about 6 or 8 months, I think, to put it together. I had 14 paintings in the show, and they had all sold by the opening. They'd all sold out by that. And they told me then that February was the worst month ever historically for them, because of the weather mostly, and it just wasn't a good month, especially right there at that time in that gallery. It was snowing so hard, there was about 3 feet of snow outside, and the slush was coming in the gallery and going down the floor about 15 feet on the wood floors into the gallery. And people were coming from New Jersey and places that they were actually upset that they drove all that way and there wasn't anything for sale. So that led to them signing me to an exclusive where I would have at least 3 shows a year, and they would give me an advance, and they would take care of all my expenses. They would fly me and my wife. They put us up in a resort or in a suite. We could rent a car. They'd pay for that. We could give them all our meal receipts, and they would reimburse us. And we could stay 3 or 4 days if we wanted extra. And so when we went to Denver, of course, we went up into the mountains, and I had shows in San Francisco, San Diego, Beverly Hills, 3 shows in Chicago on Michigan Avenue and Walton Street. I can't think of the place north of Chicago that they had too. But Palm Beach, in Florida, it's north of Miami. I can't think of the name of the place now. But Houston, and they paid for everything. It was such a great thing. And then the Gulf War started. So this was going great for 6 years. Everything was going really well. And the Gulf War started. People stopped buying art, stopped buying luxuries, stopped buying big cars, stopped buying yachts. And they had these most expensive locations, their rent and everything. So eventually they went under. They also made the mistake of they went into selling animated cells, cartoons, and they would sell these at Art Expo in New York along with a lot of their other art. They had their own printing atelier in New York on Broadway, and they had a framing place in San Francisco and in Phoenix. What's the place next to Phoenix? Scottsdale. They had another jewelry atelier there in Scottsdale. So anyway, I got to have shows in all these places, and they would send us. They made one print for me, and it went okay, but the problem was that my print had to have paint done by someone on top of the print, and they wanted me to train the person to do it, and I could never get anyone that could do it the way I wanted it done. So it didn't work too well. This is another example of how, with my automobiles, how I would try to find some abstract quality to it that would be interesting enough to spend 6 weeks on. And that's about how long it would take to do something like this. Paintings like this were generally around 48 by 60, 50 by 70. They're all pretty good size. When the Armory first opened here, when I told you earlier, Bob Montgomery donated $100,000. And so they thought it would be novel to have me paint a reproduction of his check. And so I painted this 40 by 80-inch check kind of in my style at the time. It's very colorful compared to this. It's in Liza's office right now, if you ever get back that way. But this was a check from his law firm, and no one knew this was happening. But right out front here, they had a big tent. It's a big presentation about him giving the money and about the new board and everything. The building was almost condemned. There wasn't anything going on in here. That's why they had it outside. And then all of a sudden, over here where the 2D building is, that was a parking lot. All of a sudden, this armored car pulls up with these two guys with guns and white gloves. And nobody knew what was happening. And so they brought this check in and set it up in front. And Bob says, now you're going to have to take that to the bank if you want to cash it. You know, so it was a lot of fun. I tell people this is my first $100,000 painting. I don't know if any of you ever went to the Bamboo Room in Lake Worth when it was open. It's a blues bar. I did all the black and white work there. This is a 60 by 80-inch painting. I did mostly black and white so they could shine amber lights or red lights or blue lights or whatever they wanted. They could change it. They commissioned me to do 7 paintings, including the side panels for the stage. I've done a lot of crumpled work. I started doing this crumpled work back in the early 80s, where I would crumple canvas sometimes around a model on the floor, and I would airbrush from the top a light color and from the bottom a dark color. And the canvas, in this case, the canvas was already painted different colors. But I went back and painted the black for the figure. And then what happens when you open the canvas up after it's been wrapped around a human form, everything gets wider. And so the body, of course, got much wider. The arms were wider than real life. This is one section of my studio now. Remember the old one, the other one with the 2-car garage, you know? This is the one I've been in 28 years. And usually every semester I would bring my college students for a field trip here, and I would talk to them about the work I was doing. But I get a lot of inspiration from these walls. And I would tell my students, I said, my masterpiece is somewhere between the floor and the wall. I haven't found it yet. And so when we go in the gallery after this, you'll see a painting back on the right side over here that has a lot of this color on it. That's because it's an archival pigmented print that I've gone back and painted over, and it has part of the conduit that isn't in this painting. There is more conduit over here. It goes up to the electric box up there on the right. But the other one's over here, and you'll see it in the painting. So this paper, another thing, when I was working with the thick paint that you saw in those earlier paintings, you can't wash that down the drain, so I would wipe my brushes on the wall. Now, I put paper on the wall because I knew I was going to do this. I have a 1,600 square foot studio with 17-foot ceilings, so I have a lot of space to work on, but the walls, especially on this side, are pretty full right now. Now, this is a better shot of that hanger painting. Before I ever had a show in New York, I had 5 shows at that gallery in Soho. And before I'd ever gone to it, I decided I would do a visualization painting. And the visualization was that the shell was symbolic of life. And The FL up here was Florida, and the NY on the right side was New York. And the snake up here, the suggestion was that if you stay in Florida, you're going to die. As an artist, you've got to get out of Florida if anything's going to happen. And on the other side, the right side, you have New York, and that's a wing walker on that plane. It's a biplane, and there's a little man standing on the wing. And so New York, this is about danger and about excitement, the beauty, the glamour. I was trying to convey that in some way over there. And then the lady is holding an apple behind her ear for the Big Apple. This is in my living room right now. I've had this forever. But some people had seen a snake or something also down at the bottom. But this is mostly black and white. And I hadn't had a show in New York, but after I finished this, like 6 months later, is when I had my first show. This is another plane. This one is 60 by 90 inches. It's that same plane. There's a bar in Lake Worth called Harry's, and a friend of mine was dating this young lady. This is how she dressed up on weekends. And he took pictures, and he gave me a slide and said, "Do you think you could do a painting?" And so I did a black and white painting of it. And then about 5 years later, she married this muscle man, this weightlifter, kind of guy. And they lived in Boca, and they asked me if I'd come down, take pictures, maybe do a painting of him on his Harley. Well, he had a white Harley, and when I got there, he says, "Can you wait a little bit? I'll be right back." He says, "This is my son. He owns a golf course in England. Talk to him a while." So I talked to him, and a half an hour later, he went upstairs and worked out. He pumped up to get on the bike, and he came down without a shirt on and his black leather pants, and he could hardly get his leg over the bike. I can remember like this. His pants were so tight. So then I got a commission to do a painting of him, and so in there they had a huge living room. On one end, she was on one end, and he was on the other end. Eventually, that marriage didn't work either. This was a playbill from the 80s, but this is the type of painting I was doing, the abstract illusionist painting. A lot of bright colors. It's sort of dated feeling now when I look back at it, but it was fun. These strokes, some of them, this was on another like 60 by 80 inch canvas. These strokes, some of them are an inch thick or more, and some are up to, some of the paintings, 3-4 feet long. I've also taped off areas, all the striped areas. These are all taped off, so I'm still doing that. I'm using the airbrush for shadows and to make the spheres, the bubble-like things, to try to give it a three-dimensional look. This is a painting that I had started, and I didn't like it, so I covered it. And then I started another painting, and I didn't like it, and covered it again. I started another one. This is the third painting, actually. And what happened was it was all background to begin with. And I was scratching through. There's a million scratches that I used. The back of my brush, just scratching through, just about everywhere. The straight lines are taped off. And then I took Manet's painting and sort of made a coloring book kind of outline of the figures in the Manet painting. And that led to, I was doing some paintings that were about art. It was art about art, or art about other artists' work, but I was putting my own twist in it. The Montgomerys ended up buying this. This is one of the mason jar paintings that I was telling you about. This one was one of the ones that was in Key West. And you can hardly even read ball on it, but they didn't want me to do any more. This is this perforated paper. I was putting that in a lot of the paintings, hoping it might give me some kind of an identity, because the problem with doing photorealism, I found out after a while, was that unless you were a first-generation photorealist, you probably weren't going to go too far. And you probably weren't going to break any new ground, because just about everything, it seemed like, had been done in one way or another in that area. And so it was more technical, and a lot of people like it because it's so easy to read. It was easy to sell, but I didn't feel fulfilled. And so one of the reasons I went into the abstract more was I was kind of losing the joy of painting. This is a section of the floor in my studio. And it's like that all over the place. I take pictures of my floor all the time. And if you just enhance them in your computer, they look like paintings. I mean, they're better than a lot of my paintings. Here's that perforated paper again. This is a painting that sold in a gallery I was in Boca. It's 60 by 60, 5 feet by 5 feet. And when I first painted this, the model was nude, and the painting went to a gallery on Long Island. And they said they could have sold the painting like 10 times if she had a bathing suit on. And so when I got it back, it didn't sell. When I got it back, before I put it in the Boca gallery, I put a little bit of a bathing suit on it. And it sold to these Colombian sugar growers that lived in Boca. And I helped deliver it and install it in their house. And after it was installed, I told them, I said, you know, a week ago she didn't have a bathing suit on. And they went, oh, no, we would have loved it like that. This is in front of one of my crumple canvases where I've crumpled it around a figure on the floor. And this is the last one in this series. So what you've seen here is really just a real small fraction of what I've done, but it kind of gives you an idea of some of the different directions. When we go out into the gallery here, you'll see also sort of a diverse direction. Everything's not exactly the same. And part of that is because I just get bored about doing the same thing. I could still be doing this if my eyes don't go, you know, but this is very tedious work, doing the realism. And I just lost that, the joy. There was no spontaneity. The best part of this painting was the idea, and then about 2 weeks after I was finished with it. In between, it was just labor, you know, and sometimes it was difficult, you know, to get back to work. But I was, you know, before I quit teaching, I was painting. I would teach all day, and then I would paint till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And then after 8.5 years of teaching, I finally could justify quitting. I had sold enough work and felt that I could justify. Plus, I had put my wife through school, and she had the benefits. So if anything happened, you know, she had the insurance, and she was a teacher, and she could take care of my son. But then, as soon as I could, I really moved on from this. And the only time I still do realist paintings, I get commissions, probably 1 or 2 a year. And if I like the subject matter and want to do it, you know, I'll do it. Because I do like it, but I just didn't like doing it all the time. Okay, I think I mentioned in there that a lot of my work starts with photography. And in this case, this is my sweetheart here. But this isn't really quite finished even. I didn't get to put a frame on it, and I thought about doing more. This is an archival pigmented print, but all of the things that I've done in here were also, you know, part of my process. But I usually go on and do more, but I kind of ran out of time. I don't like to rush this kind of thing, so this may not be finished. It may or may not. I'm not sure. When you look over here at this one, if you can move over and see, this is a good example of what I call my ghost tarps. I've done a whole series of these. They're on tarp canvas, tarpaulin canvas. This is my granddaughter, and this is in England. Her name's Alicia. We went for a walk in her village in Ipswich, and at the end of this gravel road was an old 19th century church with a cemetery in front. And I told her, I said, Alicia, I want to take some pictures of you. And so she ran right over and sat down in front of this. And I saw her faux fur collar, and I thought they looked like wings. And so it gave me the idea about an angel. Then I came home, and it was several weeks later, I was working on this tarp. And usually the way that I start these canvases, I don't have an idea, I don't have a plan. I just start putting paint down, and then wait for some cue to what to do, let the painting speak to me a little bit, and then I'll move on it. Well, I saw these tombstone shapes everywhere back here. And they were back here too. But that's what the first thing that I saw. And then I remembered I had this picture of her. So I went out to Kinko's, and I had a 4-foot photocopy made of it. And this is a photocopy transfer. And I've added a few other photocopy transfers. If you look around, this is one here. There's a face here. But then, this is the reason I call them ghost tarps. Do you see this image here? That just appeared in my process. It appeared, it just came out. You see, there's a little Egyptian-looking person here. That just appeared, just like a German soldier over here. There's a face here, like a side view. And then maybe another face back here. That's a photocopy transfer. Over here, this is a photocopy transfer, but can you see this face? That just appeared. And so in most of these, if you look, if you can relax your gaze a bit and stand back, you'll probably see something maybe I don't even see. It's sort of like looking at clouds, and you see a dog or a person or a face. But that's how the ghost tarp started. And see, I guess we can, while we're here, we can turn around back here. Here's some of the crumpled work that I was telling you about from the slides. These are newer pieces, but these are pretty good examples of the kind of thing I was doing. They're on two different kinds of canvas. It's regular canvas. It's a heavy canvas. But this is on a very thin, smooth canvas that Jerry's used to sell. I don't think they sell anymore. I think it's a polyester canvas, so it has a very, very fine tooth to it. And so I'm doing these washes and things on it first. And then I told you I crumple the canvas and I spray it from the top one color and the bottom another, and then there's all that color that was there to begin with. So that's how these come about. This, I have a pool, and I have, most summers I have models that I had at the college for my painting and drawing classes. I have them swim, and I take hundreds and hundreds of photos of them. The main reason even for doing these kind of things was there's so much abstract stuff going on that intrigued me. You almost couldn't miss, but this changed all the time. This was constantly changing, and it's almost difficult to find what to paint. But this is a painting from that. When I do those photorealist paintings, I didn't mention this, but I project the slides onto the canvas, and then I go up and I do the drawing around that. This is the way a lot of the photorealist painters paint. This isn't from my head or even looking at something. It has to do with projecting. This is called breathe because she's kind of taking a deep breath, to swim down in this end. Okay, we can come around here. This is mostly acrylic on canvas. And once again, this started out, I didn't have anything in mind. But in my process, I begin to see things that suggest something else. And what I saw here, I saw what looked like heads walking. And my first title for this was procession, like some procession maybe through a cemetery. But then later I changed the title to The Wall because some other people, that's what they were seeing. They saw a wall. But these things that are happening here, most of it is serendipitous. I know how to make it happen, but I can't reproduce it. I know what tools to use and how to get some effects. But these are things that I try to teach my students in my classes. I try to show them how they might be able to do this kind of thing. Sometimes you put most of these are done flat. The paint will be wet, and I take maybe saran wrap and lay the saran wrap down, and the acrylic won't stick to the saran wrap. So when the acrylic dries, you can pull the saran wrap off, and you get a lot of different textures, but you don't know exactly, what's going to happen. So the thing is, though, with acrylic is you can keep going. You can keep working until you're happy with it. This one's from my pool. And what I've done here is, this is another of the archival pigmented ink prints. And I call them that instead of inkjet because if you say inkjet to someone, they think about their home inkjet or their home laser printer. And this was done on like a $40,000 printer. It is a kind of inkjet, but it's so much more sophisticated. But this started with a photograph, and then from the photograph, I've manipulated, I've done things, and I've also come back and airbrushed. Almost, well, I'd say 99% of this has been re-airbrushed. And then the very last thing that I've done is put the resin on, the resin drops. But there are resin drops that are painted underneath it before I put those on. And so you're getting an almost 3D. And the thing that I like about it is that when you walk around this, it kind of twinkles, and you're catching the edges of light. And so in all these paintings that you see with the resin on them, part of the purpose is that they change. They change according to where you are in relation to the light and where the light is coming from. And so as you walk around any of these, especially the ones that have the drops on them, they are continually changing. This is one of the early ghost tarps. When I say early, this is probably 4 years old now. I've kept back some of these paintings just for a show, like this. But this is on a tarp. I told you about that. The way these started, like with the big one over here, this is the third or fourth large one, the one that's on that back wall. I was photographing models in my studio with this black plastic background that was all crumpled up. And after I got the photos back, I thought, you know, I should have put resin on the black plastic because it would look more interesting. And then I'll do a painting, and I'll do resin on top of the painting at the very end. Well, I put the black plastic down. It was about 12 by 20 feet. It's huge. And I spent about $200 on resin putting drops all over it. And the next day it was dry. I come in to pick up the plastic, and all the resin just rained off of it. I mean, as fast as I picked it up, the resin fell off. And so I thought, well, I was always trying to do is use it as a background. So I thought, well, I've got to find another source of you know, canvas or something that I can paint black and then put the resin on. So I checked into buying a piece of canvas, and a canvas that size is about $400. And so I went to Home Depot, and the tarp was $30. So I brought the tarp back, put it on the floor, because it's a background. You know, I'm not going to spend $400 on a background. So I put the tarp on the floor, and I started painting the black on it, and the tarp was resisting it in some places, and the black was sinking in other places. And I was looking at it, and I began to see things. And so then I decided to try some different blacks. So I had Mars black, bone black, carbon black, flat black, you know, paint store gloss black, and they all were a little bit different. Then I got whites. I had zinc white, titanium white, house painting gloss, flat, trying all these different things. And what happened was is I began to see kind of a photographic gray that would show through in these. And then I added the photocopy transfers as an element to move your eye around for the most part, and maybe look around and see something else, see something that may or may not be there. And so when you're looking at these, one of the easiest ones, this might look like a woman with a bonnet or a scarf on her head. That kind of thing just appeared, you know, in my process. So that's how the ghost tarp started. And okay, we'll move this. I told you about my wall in my studio. This is the conduit. I titled this I Conduit. Like I can do it, I conduit. And there's a lot of stuff going on here. But this started out as an archival pigmented print that I've come back and put a lot of paint on. But this is, it resembles, you know, one wall, one part of a wall in my studio. So that was the inspiration, you know, for that. This is another tarp, another ghost tarp, but this one I've folded the actual tarp, and I'm hanging it on grommets, and I folded the tarp and glued it down. I like the seams. I love the seams like in that big one over there. And then with my airbrush, I put shadows behind a lot of things to give it a little bit of a three-dimensional feeling. And so on a lot of these shapes, you'll see a little bit of a shadow, which I think makes all the difference in the world, you know, for these. Also, I do transfers where they're not all just gel transfers. They are transfers where you take a fixative, and you can spray the fixative on your black and white photocopy. And this is what Rauschenberg was doing back in the early 60s. He's the first that I know of to do this kind of transfer. He was doing it with lighter fluid, and the type of magazines, the pages were something that were soluble to lighter fluid, to whatever it was. They talked about clay, and I don't know exactly what they meant by that, but it doesn't work today. If you take lighter fluid, it won't work today. You have to use something. It depends. Like I said, I found that Grumbacher fixative, the final fixative, is one that'll work. But it's very hazardous to your health. So I don't do it that much. I use gels, and I put the gel on the ink side of the print and put it on the canvas, and the next day I wash it off, and the ink is still there. Around the, well, here's another, this is another archival pigmented print. And I've done some airbrush on it, but this is more print than airbrush. And it's called Back to the Light. This was in my pool. And what I saw was, it's kind of a mystical painting for me. It looks like she's going back to this light, and this could be other entities going back to the light. And then around the corner here, there's another painting with, it has rust on it. And then where the resin is, the resin has made the rust very dark. But I've scratched through and done this primitive kind of scrawl that I call glyphs. I used to do a lot of glyphs in those abstract illusionist paintings that had a lot of color. The borders were full of glyphs. This was a painting. This was in the All Florida show at the Boca Museum just a few months ago. This is called Light Catcher because when you walk around, once again, what you see is determined by where the light source is and what color clothing you're wearing or other people are wearing around. And when you take photographs of this, sometimes you can see faces even in it if there are people standing around. But once again, this is changing a lot, and that's one of the reasons I do it. I have a little abstract around this corner that's all brushwork. It's more abstract expressionistic. This is another archival pigmented print. Now, when I say archival pigmented print, the reason I bring out that it's pigmented print is because if it's not pigmented, that might mean it's vegetable dye. And vegetable dye fades, and vegetable dye runs when you're working on it. If it's wet, those are the earliest giclées. They were done on iris printers, and they would melt if you sweat on them, or got any water on them. This ink you can put under water, and nothing will happen, and it's not supposed to fade, for 100 years unless you left it out in the sun all day, for a long time. But this is, again, what my wall. It's very similar to a section of my wall. That was the inspiration. And you can see the pieces of tape that I've added, and this was a big green piece of tape that was over a wire that's an extension cord. And this is where I've cleaned my brushes in my studio. I've just wiped off a trowel, and that's what the trowel marks are from. I'm trying to clean off the trowel here. This is very recent, and this was one of my students at the college, and she also modeled for our drawing classes. This has photocopy transfers. This is historic. A lot of the photos I get from copyright-free books. Dover puts out about 6 of them. There's one on men, one on women, one on transportation, one on mythological characters, I think one on the Renaissance, and they're all copyright-free. And you can do up to 10 of their images without worrying about stepping on anybody's copyright. So here again, this is a painting I didn't know what was going to happen. It evolved, it changed a lot before I finally finished it. This isn't real tape, this is painted to look like tape. And I have automotive paint on here. That's where you see the more silver paint. So it fits into that category of mixed media. And it's the photocopy transfers. I saw this tunnel, and for some reason, when I was a little kid, I was fascinated with the idea of a tunnel of love. I thought, if you can get in a tunnel of love, you might get a kiss. Or something. and I saw the tunnel, and that became the title, Tunnel of Love, for this. This one over here, this started out as a crumpled piece. But when I was painting it, I saw bones. I saw the white in the middle here reminding me kind of vertebra or something going up the middle. And then I saw a bird. Do you see the bird? Okay, here's the eye of the bird. Here's the beak, here's the body, that might be a leg. And so I titled it Phoenix because it seemed to be, the phoenix dies every 100 years and rises from the ashes, and the ashes, I'm thinking gray, and so it just seemed to work for a title, for this. But what I've done, I've got this crumpled canvas, and I've put some shadows on it to give it a more three-dimensional look. That's part of the illusion. But I see, people talk about illusion, but I see, if you do anything even realistic, it's an illusion. It's not real. And so whether, it's an abstract with illusion in it, or if it's a realist painting with illusion, it's still illusion. Picasso, one time, someone asked him, why do you paint like this? And he says, do you have a picture? He said, why do you paint abstract like that? And he says, do you have a picture on you of your girlfriend? And the guy said, yeah. And he says, can I see it? And then gets out his wallet, and there's this little picture of his girlfriend. And Picasso says, my, she's very little. She's really small, and she's flat, because it wasn't her. It was an illusion of her. And so he was, I don't know if that story's true, but I heard it in college. This is rust. It's real rust in the background. Back here, you can see more of it on the side. I have a paint that you can buy, if you can find it now. I used to get it at Regal Paint, that when you paint it on, it goes on black, and then you spray this nickel salt solution on it, and overnight it turns to rust, real rust, because the paint has iron filings in it.
Looks like a Warhol oxidation painting.
Yeah, it's oxidized, right, yep. But it won't go any further. I mean, it can't rust any further because there's no more iron, no more steel or anything to rust. It's done. And so then I've sealed it with the resin on top of it. But there's different painting things that I've done that are going on in here. I wanted to put a little bit of a shadow here and there to also create a little more of the depth, a little more of the illusion of space that was going on. And when I saw it, it reminded me of maybe deep space. You know, looking out through the Hubble telescope or something, and you know, not that it really looks like that, but I just saw this great distance that goes back. It's sort of a meditative, you know, kind of painting. And this is the last one here. This is another archival pigmented print. The photograph started in my pool, but I have crumpled things going on. There's a lot going on, and the whole thing's airbrushed as well. The last coat is the resin coat, and I called it Zebra Swim because the zebra, for one thing, of the pattern, but I also saw a kind of a zebra head up here at the top. So that's about it. Thank you. Thanks.